Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to make a Dutch apple pie with a butter crust on the bottom and a lovely crumb topping on the top. And then we're going to whip up some flautas, some chicken flautas, and we'll have some guacamole as well to kind of dip the flautas in. So let's start by working on our apples here. I already have 4 apples in my pot sliced up, so I didn't have to spend like a decade slicing these guys up. So I'm just going to cut through and do the last one on here. We're going to slice it nice and thin so that it will get nice and tender. Now, when I make apple pies, I always like to pre-cook my apple filling a little bit so that it can soften up and it gets more tender in the oven. And then I don't have to bake my pie as long, which then runs the risk of you overcooking the crust or the crumb topping. So just a little cook up really does wonders to just give you a really soft and tender apple pie. And then we're going to be doing the Dutch apple pie, which is slightly different than a traditional in the fact that it has a crumb topping instead of a second layer of pie crust, which will be delicious. So, and I did for my crust, for my bottom layer, I did my traditional butter crust, which is just a fabulous, flaky, wonderful, delicious crust that I love. And then we'll just do a really simple brown sugar streusel topping. So let's get these guys peeled up, and then we'll start kind of cooking and stewing them up to get them nice and soft and tender. And we'll work on rolling out our pie crust and making the crumb. Okay, so I've got all of these kind of peeled up here, and I'm going to slice them nice and thin because, again, that's going to allow them to cook up a lot faster, get tender, and also a little bit easier to eat your pie. So when I say nice and thin, really good little slivers for this. And, you know, a lot of people will be like, oh, use a mandolin. I find it's much faster to use my knife than to go through, get out that equipment. I can get this stuff cut up pretty fast with nice thin slices. Now, maybe if I was making like 10 apple pies or something like that, I would get out a mandolin. I do have one. I just rarely use it. It was one of those things where I was like, oh, this is great, and then never use it. Okay. So we're going to throw this apples with the rest of ours, and then we'll let them start to cook up. We'll add in some apple cider, a little bit of spices, and brown sugar and butter. Let's kind of tuck those in. Going overboard. They will soften down and kind of reduce down in size as we get there. But let's get our seasonings on them, our spices. I got my apple cider here, which if I don't have apple cider, I use fresh like lemon juice, which is great. But when I do have apple cider, I love to use that as it adds, I feel like, a better apple flavor to the apple pie, while lemon adds a tartness to it. So we're just going to put in about, a tablespoon. You don't need very much of it, just a little bit to help kind of wet up those spices and the sugars and kind of help it start that thing. And now we're going to put in our sugar. I like to use brown sugar for my base for my apple pie because I love that kind of rich caramely flavor that you get from it. And we're going to do, not going to do a super sweet thing. We're just going to do about 3/4 of a cup loosely packed, which is closer to 2/3 of a cup packed for our 5 apples. Again, I'm not going to do it as sweet as I would do it with my double pie crust because the crumb topping has sugar in it and it adds a bit more sweetness. So if you over sweeten your base, then it's too sweet. We're going to add in about half a teaspoon. I'm going to add just a pinch more of vanilla extract. This helps mellow out those flavors and really just gives this nice kind of aromatic flavor to it. And then we're going to put in about, I'm going to say probably 1.5 teaspoons to 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. There we go. Kind of shake it all around. And then we are going to be using cinnamon in our crumb topping for it, so we'll get that good kind of flavor in it. But this is going to have to sit for a second and reduce, and then that will start to mix in, but it will reduce down here in just a second. that one apple. Last apple was pretty big here. But it's so funny. Once it starts to get soft and this liquid melting, it's going to be like half this volume. Okay, and this is going to be for our Dutch apple pie. And then we'll be making our flautas here in a little bit. So earlier today, I whipped up some butter pie crust. So we've got here, this is just really, really simple. For like my base pie crust, I do is that 2 sticks of butter, 2 cups of flour, about a teaspoon of salt, and about 8 tablespoons of ice cold water. And then you kind of mix it in, but it's the best pie crust. It's much better than a shortening base pie crust. It's just so delicious in flavor. Okay, we're going to roll this out. And then this is going to be on the base of it. So again, with a Dutch apple pie, you're going to have that pie crust bottom and a little bit of a crumb topping on the top. Now, a lot of people will put a little bit of sugar in their pie crust dough. I typically don't put sugar in the pie crust because a lot of times I use my pie crust for both savory and sweet dishes. But you could definitely add about a tablespoon of sugar into it. Earlier today, I had cooked up a meal for my parents and their friends. I made them chicken pot pie and homemade sourdough bread and gave them some apple butter and a salad. So I actually made more pie crust because I made them a big chicken pot pie. We'll do a little kind of short of it later for you guys to see. I actually did a little lattice topping on that chicken pot pie and it turned out gorgeous. And so I'm just hoping that they enjoyed it. But the nice thing about not adding your sugar into your pie crust allows you to have more versatility to it for it, because I don't want to sweeten pie crust on my savory dishes. Okay, so it's pretty firm because when you make your butter crust, you need to chill the dough in the fridge for, an hour, at least an hour minimum, so it firms back up. That's going to give you the really lovely flaky layers in it. And then we're going to roll it out. I find rolling it between 2 pieces of parchment paper so much easier. You don't have to worry about adding extra flour to prevent your pie crust from sticking to your thing. It makes it move smoother, works easier, and have to do it. This is a nice marble rolling pin. And if you notice, I don't roll like this with it. It's too much work. I really get in there, and it is like moving mountains here, and I just kind of keep twisting it and moving it out to kind of push it down because I don't want to overwork it, but I want to thin it out so it gets, again, those flaky layers in there. And when I'm mixing up my pie crust, I will cut the butter into it and everything like that, but when I'm forming it together after I've forked in the liquid, I do my press and fold base to it. Okay, let's take a break from that. Whew. Let's give this a good stir now. These are, again, our apples. These were Jonathan apples that we seasoned up here with 5 of them. Now, with apple pie, you always need a lot more apples than you think because they do reduce down in size and they get quite small. I remember like one time I made an apple pie and I was like, oh, 3 apples. This was back when I was younger, like in high school. 3 apples will be fine. That's a lot if they snoop. That it was the most skimpiest apple pie ever. There was no apples in it. 5 is still going to be on the small side, but I figured we've been having so many desserts and whatnot. I didn't want to do a super huge one. And Teddy this morning, when I talked about chicken pot pies before he went off to school, he was like, make an apple pie? And I was like, I will make you an apple pie. And he was like, yeah. So this is per Teddy's request. And I was like, oh, I haven't made a Dutch apple pie in a while. So we'll do that. And Dutch apple pie is my favorite. Wow. Way over spoon on that one. Here we go. Okay, these are good. Let them sit now. They're already starting to sweat. And get that going up. I'm going to turn it up nice and high now. And let's get this last guy out. And then we got to make our crumb topping. But we almost have them rolled out. The nice thing is I like to use the parchment paper that's a little bit more opaque for it. But you can see where your circle is. And I find, for me, so I can always just push in the same direction instead of going like this and like this and this. Just rotate. And you can do that because you did it on parchment paper. Here we go. This should be about good. Let me grab my pie crust dish. Yep. And you always want to make sure it's bigger than your pie thing because it has that edge to go down. So I'm actually going to just roll it out a little bit more this way, and then it should be perfect. So don't just make it the same diameter as your pie dish. It needs to be bigger than it because you've got to do the shelf, you know, the little edges there. Okay. We've got this. Beautiful. Now, you peel it off. I used Himalayan sea salt in my crust today, so you actually see a little bit of the bits of the pink salt in there. Those little bits will add the nice little flavor, a little pop of texture. Now, the beauty of also doing it on here is I can, just throwing it around. I can easily put my pie dish right here, flip this over. I've got it working to where I want it. And then you peel back. So there's no risk of really ripping your pie crust or having the Frankenstein pie crust where you've got to patch it back together because you dropped it or ripped it moving it. Beautiful. So you just do this. And then again, I've got it in here, making sure it goes down. And I will cut off the edges, but I'm not going to cut off my edges until I've got it filled up for it. But just again, gently work it down. Be careful not to make your pie crust too thin or you risk it tearing. And then if you get a tear in there, the problem is then you can get some of your base of your pie seeping down below your crust and you won't get that lovely butter crust to it. Okay, that guy is all ready. Let's make up our crumb topping, but I can hear this bubbling here. Now, it was funny, the other day I read like a story about the origin of the original pie crust. And the original pie crust was actually not supposed to be eaten, but it was the vessel that you cooked the pie in so that it wouldn't spoil and it could travel well. And so it was like a rock hard flour crust that was not very good. And over the time, it has evolved to this really delicious crust.
You have a request to go over the pie crust?
Yes. So the pie crust is made with 8 ounces of butter, which is 2 sticks of butter, 2 cups of flour, a teaspoon of salt, and about 8 ounces of, not 8 ounces, 8 tablespoons of ice cold water. And that is going to be the base for it. Now, I made 4 times that recipe this morning because I made pot pies and whatnot, but it is going to be delicious. It's got this just like, you can even almost see like some of the specks of butter in there, but you cut your ice cold butter into your flour that you've already mixed your salt into it. Once that's cut up to where you have like this kind of loose, soft crumb, then you use a fork to mix in your water or your ice cold water. And then you dump it out and it's going to be crumbly. And then you press and fold until you have it together and you pop it in the fridge and let it chill for like an hour. Okay, let's make our base. So I have 1 stick of melted butter here, so a half a cup, because we're making a good amount of crumb to kind of cover the top of our pie. So we're going to add in about, I want to say, I'm going to mix it in a half a cup, well, a little bit more. We're going to just do a little bit more than a half a cup. So like 2/3 of a cup of brown sugar for our crumb topping. I'm going to mix it up here, kind of coat it until we've got our creamed, essentially our butter and brown sugar together. And I like to use brown sugar on the crust because it gives you a richer crumb. But if you don't like brown sugar, or, you can definitely use white sugar on it. It will give you a blonder crumb, a more flaky one. We're going to add in about a teaspoon of cinnamon. Here we go. And I'm using salted butter. Salted butter is key. Adds just that little bit of extra, really enhances the flavor. Okay, we've got this mixed up. Now we're going to add in our flour. And we're going to use around a cup of flour, but I'm just going to mix it until I have this nice kind of crumb that can fall together but isn't too crumbly or too sticky. So I'm going to start with a little bit and then we'll just mix it in until we get to the right texture. So that's about 3/4 of a cup in there right now. And I'm going to mix it. And then I'll probably get in here with my fingers to get the right crumb texture. There we go. Now that cinnamon and that brown sugar is going to give you that crumb, that really nice color to it. So here my crumb is still a bit too sticky. As you see, it's holding together and I've only added 3/4 of a cup in. So we're going to add in the other 1/4 of a cup and we're going to mix it together. And essentially I want it to be able to, if you have kids and you know what kinetic sand is, it's going to be like that texture where when you pinch it, it holds together, but it falls apart when you release it. Here, get all of that goodness off. So this is kind of the texture that I want. So you can still get some good crumbs to it, but it's not super, sticky. And you don't want it too soft and crumbly where you've added too much flour because then you're going to have a really powdery crumb.
You have a question. Do oats go in this crumb?
You can put oats in it. If I decided to leave oats out because I did like an oat crisp the other day, but you can definitely add oats in. If you're going to add oats in, I would add in about a 1/2 cup of oats before we mix in the flour. Coat them up, and then you'd add in your flour. You'd probably need just a smidge less flour, like 3/4 of a cup to get it there. But you could definitely add it in if you wanted that kind of oaty crust to it, which is delicious. We made like a apple kind of crumb bar the other day, and we did our oat crust with that. Okay, look at this. It is looking great. They're starting to get nice and soft. You see how we're kind of reducing them out. So we're going to spoon these guys into our mixture and we're going to let it kind of bake up now. I'm going to grab a slotted spoon to scoop these apples out because I don't want to take up all of that juice with it because I don't want my pie crust to get soggy. And then we'll cut off the rest of our crust and get it there. Let me move this guy out of the way. Here we go. And then this guy can go in the oven and bake. Beautiful. So we'll put this in here. Now, if you wanted to keep all of your liquid, I would throw in like a tablespoon of, like cornstarch to gel it up. If you leave it as a liquid, then you're going to have a really, really runny pie, which is why I love to kind of do this pre-cooked because then I can take these seasoned soft apples out without having all of that liquid in there. And it just gives you a nicer texture to it, but you'll still have all that flavor in it, especially since we cook these in the apple cider. But you see, look how beautiful they are. And again, the nice thin slices are going to cook up a lot faster. Get all of this. And the beauty is if you could actually keep reducing this liquid that we have left to make like an apple syrup to like drizzle over ice cream or whatnot if you wanted to. Waste not, want not. Okay. I've got this. And then I'm just going to take a smidge of this liquid and just spoon it over. I don't need very much, but I do want to add a little bit in because these apples will still sweat out a lot more. Here we go. Beautiful. Okay, off that. Let's do our crumb topping over. Actually, yeah. Let's get my fork first, and then we're going to cut our pie crust off, and then we'll do our crumb topping on. Let me grab my scissors. So I just take scissors, and you just kind of snip right along the edge of your dish right here. Don't try to like cut with a knife. Scissors just work so much easier. And that was going to smooth it out nicely. And then we'll use our fork to give you that kind of fluted edge to it. There's no need. I know a lot of people will like roll like a big kind of, dough snake and place it over to do like a little design. You could definitely do it if you want to, but no need. So now we're just going to take our fork and you're just going to push it along the edge here. This is going to allow it to crisp up really nice as well. And it gives you just that more kind of professional look to it. And it's really not that extra work to it. Here we go.
It's like a personal size pie.
This would be a personal size pie for you. At Thanksgiving every year, my husband gets his own personal pumpkin pie because he's a great lover of pumpkin pie. I do not like pumpkin pie, but I make sure he gets his own personal one. Everyone else in my family likes it, but not me. Love all of their pumpkin things. So let's put our base to this over it. We've got our nice, lovely kind of crumb topping here. And then once I've got the thing, I like to kind of squeeze my last little ones to give them a really big chunk to it because it's just going to have a little bit more texture and on there. Beautiful. Okay. And then we're going to go pop this in the oven at, I have it set for 375, and this is going to cook for about 30 minutes. And the reason it doesn't take forever to cook is because we pre-cooked our apples. Normally, if you're making an apple pie and you haven't pre-cooked your apples, it can take 45 minutes to an hour to bake them to get them soft and tender, which can risk getting a burnt crust on it. So 375, we're going to slide this guy in and let it bake up. So let me put my timer and let's start making the rest of our lunch today. So, and you know what? While we're doing that, I'm actually going to reduce a little bit of this apple juice that we have left to make a little syrup because I think that will be delicious. So I'm going to just turn it on low and we'll just have it reduce here and put that out. It will get thick enough and you'll be able to, drizzle it over yogurt or vanilla ice cream.
You have a question? Have you used all the apples yet?
I have 9 apples left. So I made sure I actually went and I looked through and I was like, how many apples do I have left? So I have 9 left. And we think we had, I want to say 60 or 70 when we came back from the apple orchard. I'm going to put in about a, teaspoon and a half of olive oil in here. We're going to kind of start to heat it up. And we're going to start making the sauce base to our flautas. And then we'll put in our shredded chicken and we'll start frying them up. So I've got my green onions here. I'm going to chop up my whiter parts and we're going to let them saute up. So I'm going to take the whiter to the pale green and then we'll add in the darker green parts later. This will give us a nice onion flavor. I didn't want to put a whole, an onion in because I didn't want to have all that texture from the onion. So green onions are kind of a great because they give you that onion flavor without being too, noticeable. They're more minor in there. And let me get this cooking there. I'm going to get a little spatula here or tongs. I'm going to toss this in here. And then once it sautés up for a few minutes, we're going to add in our garlic. There we go. So let that kind of cook there. I'm going to turn this on to a little bit higher.
Yo has a question for you.
What's for dinner tonight? That is a good question. I don't think we've actually narrowed it down what we're making for. I don't know. I have no idea. I know I have a soccer game tonight. So that's going to I'm hoping to think about what I'm going to make there with our, for the soccer game. So I'm not 100% sure. So still thinking about it. We'll see. I have no idea. It'll be delicious. That's what I know. Okay, I've got 1 tomato here. You don't need a whole lot. We're going to be also using some tomato paste to give us a kind of a richer thing. But I'm going to dice up my tomatoes nice and small because we're going to kind of saute them up. And this will add a little bit of our, acidity to the base of our flautas to season up our chicken, to give it a very, as if we have a nice kind of stewed chicken flavor to it. Okay. Let's get this guy chopped up. So again, going for a really nice fine dice in it. And that's because with the tomato skins, if you don't chop them up small, then you'll notice those skins in there, their texture and whatnot. And we don't want that. Here we go. Okay, I've got my tomatoes. There we go. Beautiful. So again, almost as if you're going to make salsa, but halfway there.
You have a question? What's your favorite quick go-to meal?
My favorite quick go-to meal is probably, you know what? Spaghetti or meatballs, because I can make spaghetti and meatballs so quickly and so fast in like 30 minutes. Homemade meatballs too. Or honestly, it's a pasta dish because everybody but my husband loves pasta in this family. So I like butter noodles with a quick fried chicken or sauteed chicken. Yeah, sauteed chicken's even faster. So those are kind of my good go-to meals for it. Yeah, I feel like that's it. Those are whenever my kids, want something, it's typically one of those meals, and they're easy to do. I'm sure if Evie gets her way, she'll have spaghetti and meatballs tonight. So that might be it because I do have the ingredients. I always try to have those ingredients on hand. That is, I will say that's Evie's favorite meal, but that is a meal that everyone in my family loves. There's not one little naysayer on it. So it's always a crowd pleaser. Oh, yeah.
You have a question. Do you have any good side ideas for them going to a steak barbecue tomorrow?
Well, I do some sides. I will say I have this really good pasta salad that I love, which is made with like tomatoes, fresh mozzarella, basil, and you do it in a vinaigrette. There's potato salad. If you look back at either, I feel like it's my Memorial Day kind of cook off back in May, I made a bunch of my favorite sides to go with our thing there. I've made my specialty baked beans, potato salad, 3-bean salad, pasta salad. So those keep really well for those kind of like a barbecue sides to it. And they're always a hit. I will say my potato salad that I make is like a really big hit. I had last year or 2 years ago, I had my cousin from Sweden, and she loved it so much that she had to get the recipe from me, and then she made it for all of her friends in Sweden, and they all loved it. And because it's like a very classic one, but it doesn't have mustard in it, and it's just a really delicious potato salad. Okay, we've got our garlic and our green onions in here. So let me add in my tomatoes. We're going to let these saute up. These are going to add a little bit of liquid, which will be great for our kind of stewing sauce here. I'm going to mix this up, and then I realized I forgot to grab my chili spice and my paprika out of my spice cabinet. So I'm going to go grab that real quick, but let me give my apple juice over here a little stir because it's simmering, and this is going to make such a delicious kind of spice cider sauce. So let me grab my spices. Okay, luckily one of them should be really easy to see because it's bright red. Paprika and chipotle chili. And we'll use a little bit of this. Got them. Got to have these spices so I can bring in my nice kind of flavor. Make it feel like you stewed your chicken all day, but you didn't. Okay, turn this guy up a little bit. We're going to let this saute for just a second. Then we're going to add in our spices. And then we'll add in some tomato paste and then a little bit of broth. And then we'll start stewing up our chicken. And then we'll shred our cheeses and start working on our flautas and make our guacamole. Okay, so our spices that we're going to use today, we're going to use a little bit of taco seasoning. And luckily I have just a smidge left. I've got about a teaspoon left. So I'm just honestly going to use the rest of this. But a teaspoon of just basic taco seasoning. I always get like bulk from Costco. I love it because I use it for more than just tacos, and it can just give you that nice kind of flavor without having to have all those specialty spices on hand. I'm going to use a little bit of chipotle chili powder here. I'm not going to, even though there's a little bit left in here, I'm going to use about a half a teaspoon. This is going to add a little bit of heat to our dish, which will be great because you're going to want it to kind of pop when you are making your flauta, so you have this great seasoning, because it's just, you've got your tortilla, the flauta base, and then cheese, so you want it to really have a good seasoning to it.
Yeah, question. Do you make 3 big meals a day?
No, I only make 2 meals a day. My lunch, I typically try to make a smaller one to it. And then I do dinner. So I like cook 2 dinners for us. Now this morning, I did make another meal. You'd be surprised, I already made chicken pot pie, sourdough bread, a salad today, because my parents had some like longtime colleagues, friends from back in the day when we used to live in Iowa visiting. And so I made them a lunch today. But no, normally I make like our lunch for my husband and I with a little extra for my parents, and then I do dinner for the kids. And then on the weekends, I'll do a breakfast and a dinner. I only do 2 big meals a day, and they're not, I always try to make the lunch or breakfast not super big. We're going to add in about a teaspoon and a half of onion powder. This is going to give a great savory flavor. And then we're going to add in our paprika. We want about a teaspoon and a half of paprika as well.
You have a question. For those who missed the recipe for the apple pie, do you post it anywhere?
We will upload our video to the link on our page. So all of our streams we upload onto our page on there. And I might make my Dutch apple one a recipe card for my members this week. I try to post them out 3 recipes each week for our members and based on some of the foods that we cook during the week. But everybody has access to our videos. And I try to make sure I go through the entire steps on how to make every part of it, so you can easily just watch and recreate at home. Okay, now we've got this lovely kind of seasoned paste here. We're going to add in our tomato paste to it as well. I used some of this tomato paste the other day when I made my tortellini soup, so we're going to use the rest of it. We want about, a tablespoon in here. This is going to give you a really nice kind of stewed tomato base for it with our sauteed tomatoes in there. There we go. And then we're going to add in some water and then a little bit of bouillon. I'm going to use vegetable bouillon. I don't think I'm going to use all 2 cups, but I like to start with, have it here just in case. I added about a half a cup at first, and we're going to mix it together. As you can see, it gets really creamy as you're essentially rehydrating the tomato paste. There we go. And I just want it to be a thick enough sauce that it's going to cling onto my chicken, but that it's not going to be too runny. So it's going to be about a cup of water, maybe a smidge more, because this is going to give all this flavor to our chicken. And then let me grab my bouillon. You could also use chicken bouillon if you wanted. I feel like the vegetable bouillon has a bit more of a savory flavor. We don't need a whole lot, just about a teaspoon or so of bouillon. And I like to use this over straight up broth unless I've had the time to make my own, because I feel like the store-bought broth is very, very bland. And this allows you to add more flavor for less liquid. Here we go. We got a smidge more. And now we're going to add in our chicken, but I'm going to chop it up. So earlier in this week, I made chicken noodle soup, and I prepped up a bunch of chicken so that I could have a really rich broth for my soup. So I had more chicken thighs in it, but then I kept my shredded chicken so that I could make a chicken pot pie, which I made earlier today. We'll post a little short of that later. And then, I also use it for just great recipes to throw into soups and stuff like that. So you do the work once, but you have it prepped up. Also, Costco has shredded rotisserie chicken you can buy, which is also really great. I'm just going to cut these up into, a little bit easier, manageable pieces so that when I'm rolling them up in our flauta, I don't have huge pieces of chicken. And this is a mixture of chicken thighs and breasts for it. So the breasts are slightly drier meat. Thighs are darker one, have a bit more fat, which actually makes them taste a little bit nicer. We're going to add this chicken into our stewed stewed broth here, I should say. And you can see how it's kind of clinging onto our chicken, but it's not going to be super runny, which is what you want, because you don't want to have, when you're filling up your tortilla, you don't want it to be soaked. Beautiful. So now we're just going to let that stew for a second, and then we are going to chop up our green onions and shred our cheese, and then make our guacamole and start frying up our flautas. Let's give our sauce over here a nice stir. It's actually, I can already feel it starting to thicken up on there. So I'm actually going to turn it off now, because if you cook it too long, you'll make candy, and you want it to be slightly sticky, but not so sticky that it hardens into like a crunch. So if you're ever making like sauces, compotes, or whatnot, as it cools, it thickens up more. So don't try to cook it until it's the right consistency. You cook it for a little bit before, because as it cools, it naturally thickens up more. Okay, let's get our green onions. We can toss those in here. We'll just grab my apple knife. So we used the white parts of our green onions, and we added those in. Now I'm adding in the darker green parts. I don't like to add all of the green onion at the time, because green onions, if you cook them too long, they get mushy and lose their flavor. Okay. While that's stewing, I'm going to flip over, and I'm going to shred up my cheese that we're going to mix in, so that we have this nice kind of cheesy chicken for our flauta. Now, you could totally also do it without the cheese, but I love the cheese. I've got a mixture here of different cheddars. We're not going to use all of them, but we'll do the white cheddar and a little bit of this medium. We're not going to need this one. You could also use pre-shredded cheddar or cheese, or any cheese like Monterey, Kobe Jack. Those will all be great with this, but we are great lovers of cheddar cheese in this house. So we're going to grate this up. Now, you could always buy shredded cheese if you want to. It makes it a little easier. I love Tillamook for the pre-shredded, because they have nice thick slices on it. Here. Does the cameraman need a treat? There we go. But I find that when you want to have a really creamy melt on your cheese, if you buy the store-bought shredded cheese, they have an anti-caking agent on it, which prevents it from sticking together if it gets exposed to different temperatures, which, great for transport, but it actually messes up your consistency when you're melting food, and it will give you a grittier texture to it. So if you're ever making homemade cheese or like mac and cheese or stuff like that, always shred it yourself. It takes like a few extra seconds. It really doesn't take much, but it's going to give you a smoother, creamier end product to it. There we go. So we've got this mixed up. Here we go. Now before I mix my cheese in here, and remember the cheese will add a bit more saltiness, so we don't need to have it as salty as we want. I'm going to taste it to see if we're at the right flavor. We need to add any more salt, because you want to make sure it's seasoned up perfectly before we mix it up. Delicious. It has a little bit of a kick there from that chipotle chili pepper, but it is going to be amazing. Now we're going to add our cheese in, which will make it nice and creamy. Woo! I told you I'm a spice babe, and that chipotle is getting me. But once we mild it down with the cheese, it will be much better. But you got to taste it first so you have the right consistency. So we've got our cheese in here. This is going to melt together. You could also just throw in the cheese as you're rolling it up, but I like to put it in here because then you get this creamy cheese throughout. Okay, I'm going to turn off the heat. You don't want to leave the heat on because then you can end up scalding your thing. But you see how this has all got this just lovely kind of creamy, cheesy mixture into it. So delicious. Let's start wrapping these up and we're going to get ready to fry them. And then we'll make our guacamole. I'm going to switch this up here because I like to fry right there. We've got some olive oil. You don't need to have these submerged. You just need to have a thin layer on the bottom of your pan so that it gets that good crisp fry on it. Do a smidge more. So don't feel like you've got to have them submerged. I find doing the little half fry and flipping over works great. I'm going to heat it up on high on an 8, but once we go to put it in there, I'm going to reduce it down to about a 4 because I don't want it to burn my tortillas because tortillas can cook up really fast. But I want them to get nice and crispy. Okay, I'm using flour tortillas because I love flour tortillas. But you could definitely use corn tortillas, and then I believe it's more of a taquito than a flauta. These are not perfect circles. They look more like my tortillas when I make homemade tortillas. Okay, we're gonna grab up our meat here. I'm gonna place it in. Now, try not to resist the urge to overstuff. And I like to overstuff. But we're just gonna roll it up like this. Now, you can put a toothpick in here to keep it and hold it together. But I find when we just put it in there to fry it, and as long as you place it that seam side down, it will seal together. Let's get our stewed meat and chicken. I try just to grab the meat and that kind of the cheesy, creamy part without too much of the liquid because you don't want it to be too soggy. And the nice thing with this is you'll have a little bit of that extra juice kind of like seep out, but it's going to flavor that tortilla. Just kind of think about how a birria tacos are. You dip them in that like flavorful sauce. This is going to flavor up the sauce, but we'll crisp it up once we fry it. So we'll give it that flavor, but it will be nice and crispy. This also right here would be delicious over rice if you wanted to, if you didn't even want to go and do all the work of rolling it. Here we go. And if you wanted to do these in a really big burrito, you could definitely do it as well. I just like the taquitos or the flautas, the little ones, because then you just dip them in your guacamole and you just like eat them like that, like a chip almost. Okay, let's check our hot oil, see if we're ready. What I like to do is if I get a quick sizzle once I add my drop of water in, I know that it'll be ready. Still needs a little bit longer. It's almost there. There we're going.
So I have a question. Can you make this recipe without the chicken for a vegetarian option?
You definitely could. I would saute up a full onion, peppers, zucchini, all of those things. You want a vegetable that has a bit of meatiness to it to kind of give you a bulk to it. If you know how to cook jackfruit would be really great with this. Or even like, portobello mushrooms that you stewed up work well. Okay, I'm going to turn it down to about a 4 now because we've got this good crisp in. Again, put the fold side down. That fold side down is going to allow it to seal up. So then when we flip it on the other side, you don't have to worry about it so much. And low and slow. You've got it hot, but don't leave it hot or you'll burn your taquitos before you get a good crisp on them.
So you have a question. If you use corn tortillas, is the rest of it gluten-free?
Yes, because I didn't add any other base in here that would use it. So yes, you could definitely use corn tortillas. Now the tricky thing with corn tortillas, if they are not super fresh, they will break as you try to roll them. You could also do, I feel like the cassava flour tortillas, which are also gluten-free, have a better roll to them, and the almond flour ones. But corn tortillas, if they're not fresh, they can be very, very brittle, which, makes it a little bit harder to do that. Now you could also just do them like a quesadilla where you put, your meat and cheese in there and just flip it that way with the corn. I've got my tongs over here. Let's see how these are cooking up. Beautiful. So we've got our first one done. That was our first one. And I'm going to get a plate and a paper towel so that we can put them on there so that they suck up that extra grease. You could also put them on a cookie drying rack as well. Beautiful. And I do love the flour tortillas because I love that fried flour. Like, those taco salads and the big fat. Oh, I love those. Okay. But once you start frying them, they don't need long. I'm going to also grab a bowl to make our guacamole here. Just keep an eye on them because they will go from perfect to overcooked in just a few minutes. I've got them cooking at a 4. Or a 3, I should say. More of a 3. Okay, I've got 2 avocados. They're good size ones. Let me grab a fork. And we'll get these smashed up because my favorite thing to do with our flautas are to dip them in guacamole. So pretty good, although I got a jumbo pit in it. Okay, much more. It always makes you sad when you get the biggest stone in your avocado because you lose out on precious avocado. Let's check these out real quick. This guy should be ready to flip. Perfect. Just about. Turn it up just a smidge. And now we're going to put our avocados in. I find if your avocados are nice and ripe, you should be able to peel off your skin really easy. You don't even have to do the work to scoop them out. This is also how, you always get that really pretty look when they slice them up at restaurants. It's because you've got this pretty base that's easier to slice. But if your avocado is underripe, your peel will not pull off from it. And if it's overripe, well, that's a sad day. There we go. I'll wash my hands. And let's get these guys out. Beautiful. Nice kind of golden brown. Put it your greasy side down so that it will suck up and leave you with a really crisp one. Now, these aren't deep fried, so they're not going to be quite as crunchy as the deep fried ones, but I like that crispiness with a little bit of chewy as well. Okay, let's make these guys ones up and we can get them in there. There we go.
Do you have a question for someone that's never bought avocados before? How do you pick out a good one?
So, honestly, at the store, I buy them when they're still firm because they're never ripe at the store. So I never go with a plan that I need avocados that day to use. So when you get them firm. You just make sure there isn't any like blemishes or dents on it because if a bruised avocado is awful. Then I leave them on my counter for about 1 day to 2 days until they have a teeny bit of give. So if you squeeze them, they kind of smush in just a little bit, but not a lot. Then I pop them into the fridge and they'll be ready to use. I like my avocados cold when I'm using them because I think, they taste better cold. But that's how I do it. So I never put them out perfect at the store. I pick them out when they're firm at the store, sometimes a little bit green. And then I wait for them to ripen at home. That way I'll know that it will be perfect. Because I will say most produce that you buy from the store outside of like apples and oranges and strawberries, but like melons or pineapple, most of those are not ripe when you get them. Like, go buy a pineapple. If you cut into it that same day, it's going to be rock hard. So I always let it sit on my counter for a couple of days to ripen up. Get this one made. And in here. And again, if you are new to like frying, you can definitely put a toothpick in there to help hold it together. That way you don't have to do as much of the kind of the work, to the gentleness with it. Okay, I've got my avocados here. I find the best way to make guacamole is to use a fork to smash up your avocados, because it's going to allow you to get them very smooth, but still with a little bit of that texture. I don't like a very smooth guacamole. I like it to be not super chunky, but a little bit of a rough texture to it, because I think it just has a bit more flavor. I feel like when you whip it, it just isn't quite right. So we're going to first use our fork to mash up our avocados here, which you can see is working great. And then we're going to add in just fresh lime juice and garlic salt. But let's check out our taquitos here. Beautiful. That one those two still need a little bit. Okay, so we've got our lime. I'm going to use, since I have just about, I'm not going to use quite all of it, like 2/3 of a lime. And you've got to use fresh lime juice. You can't use any of that like store-bought liquid lime juice. It doesn't have the right flavor to it. It's got more of a chemical. So we're going to juice up our lime in here. This is going to give it that acidity that you want, and it's also going to prevent it from going brown. And then we're going to do a good shake of garlic salt. You're going to want, around like a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon. And we'll mix it in. And I keep it simple. This is all I do. This is the way my kids love it. Now, you could always add in chopped up onions, peppers, tomatoes if you wanted. But this is where it's at, just simplicity. We're going to go grab our apple pie here in just a second. I'm just going to flip these real quick so that they don't overcook. Beautiful. Perfect. Okay, let's go grab our Dutch apple pie out of the oven. It should have a nice kind of golden crumb on it. Grab my trivet, my bear paws. Beautiful. You can actually see my pie crust, how crispy it is. It's lifted off the thing. This is looking gorgeous. Beautiful. You can see that caramely like apple juice kind of bubbling out right there. And look at those flaky layers. This is gorgeous. Okay. Set my precious baby right here. So this is a Dutch apple pie we made with 5 Jonathan apples inside that we spiced up with cinnamon, a little bit of apple cider, and brown sugar. We made a brown sugar streusel crumb topping on the top. And then right around here, you can see our butter crust. If you look here, you can actually see all of those flaky layers in our butter crust. That is from the press and fold technique of how we shape the dough together. But again, just butter, flour, and salt and water for our crust, our apples, and then the crumb topping, which makes it different from a traditional apple pie into a Dutch apple pie. It is going to be delicious. Okay, we are just about finished here, ready to serve up. So let's get our guacamoles made and get our last set of these out in just a second. Beautiful. Nice golden brown. Oh, lost it. Put it back in there. Perfect. So I'm going to go grab a plate, and we are going to serve up our thing. You know what? We'll do it in one of my new bowls because we don't need a big plate for this. Okay, let's slide that over, and I'm going to grab my guacamole. So for lunch today, we will have our delicious taquitos. So look how beautiful they are. easy, crispy, crunchy, filled with chicken that we had put in a tomato sauce that we flavored up with paprika, onion powder, chipotle chili powder, tacos seasoning, and then of course we have shredded cheddar cheese and white cheddar cheese. And you'll literally take your taquito and you're gonna just dip it right in like this, and delicious. And we'll have that with our Dutch apple pie, which has that nice, again, brown sugar crumb to it, made with flour, butter, and brown sugar with the spiced apples inside. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family, and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page, so if you ever want to recreate any of our recipes at home, you can go to that link and search for what we made, and you can cook along with us. So you just have to search for Flautas and our Dutch apple pie. Again, we also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. I've got my knives, my cutting boards, my Hexclad pans, my All-Clad, all the different gadgets I use in the kitchen I have in there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe.